start streaming? Here I go.
I'm thinking I'll make a short of this. Is it that good? No, right?
Not that good.
Okay. So play how much ever you go and sit on the this thing.
Huh?
So, sit proper. If you are sitting on the floor, you have to take support of the ottoman. ये सिद्धि नहीं बोली खेलने आना है करके.
She said later.
Okay.
Okay, so just another minute or so to wrap up this exercise, and then we'll finish off with the presentation. Everyone's quiet, so I assume you're pretty much done with this content.
Never.
So what I'll do is I'll get started here, and then you can continue working through the exercise. We should still have a bit.
With if you want to play anything else in Roblox, like a hobby or something, do that also. Okay, since we are connected.
Move on.
Just started.
Thank you. Just one more topic to cover, which is this last part around setting up SAML SSO with success factors. So you've seen quite a few different scenarios for setting up SAML, right? Luca went through a presentation earlier where we talked about SAML setup with SAP Analytics Cloud. You've just seen SAML setup with SAP NetWeaver in your exercise.
Hey.
What?
No, I just want to talk about the process of setting up SAML with SAP SuccessFactors. And in this case, the SAML setup is with the Identity Authentication Service. The reason why you would want to do that is because of some of the stuff that I talked about earlier, right? If you want to use embedded analytics or learning module system, then you would need to have your SuccessFactor use Identity Authentication Service as its SAML provider. Okay, so let me minimize this. I'll bring up my presentation that I want to actually go through now. Okay. Oops, let me go to the beginning of this, sorry. Okay, so again, the focus here is to set up SAML with SuccessFactors, right? And I give you the reasoning why you would want to do that. So in this presentation, I'm just going to talk about the process of how you would actually do this setup if you have SuccessFactor in your environment. Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on Identity Authentication Service or Identity Provisioning Service because you should be very familiar with those services and know some of the concepts that we've covered. So I'm going to quickly skip over some of these concepts in the slides, but you'll get to see the process from end to end from a SuccessFactor perspective. Okay. So in order to configure your SuccessFactor environment with Identity Authentication Service as its SAML provider, first thing you would do is you would go into the Upgrade Center in your SuccessFactor environment. And in that Upgrade Center, you would go and say, okay, I want to now initiate or use Identity Authentication as my SAML provider. So let me show you that actually. Why don't we do this together? I can't walk you through the process, but here's my SuccessFactors instance. I'm logged in already. And if you go into your SuccessFactors environment and just search for Upgrade Center, right? In SuccessFactors, there will be an option for you to then should be able to find initiate. Yeah, so this process right here, initiate integration with SAP Cloud Identity Services. Okay, so as a SuccessFactors admin, you would need to go in here and initiate this process. Okay, when you do this, it will ask you, okay, now what needs to happen, right? What do I do? Sorry, I'm gonna go back. So when you initiate this process, you will be asked to select your identity authentication system you want to integrate with. Okay? So if you're a customer, you have multiple identity authentication system services in your environment, you would need to pick the one that you want to use for production. So if this was my production SuccessFactors environment, I would pick my production IAS instance. Okay. So during the upgrade process, once you initiate it, it will ask you which IAS tenant you want to use. If you're a customer who doesn't have an IAS tenant at all, it can also create a new IAS and IPS tenant for you.
Dilla, क्या खा रही हो?
Right? So as I'm not sure how many people here are using SuccessFactors, but that's the first step in the process is to go through Upgrade Center and initiate that integration. And once you do that, it triggers basically a process on the SAP side where we have people in the background that take your SuccessFactors environment and they go in and configure this identity authentication service and identity provisioning service for you. Okay. So your SuccessFactors system, the trust between SuccessFactors and your IAS tenant would automatically be done for you. That's not something you would have to do manually. In the previous exercise, you had to do a manual trust setup. With this process, when you initiate the upgrade process, it will do the trust setup between IAS and your SuccessFactors instance. It will also configure certain stuff in that's required for IPS to be able to run the provisioning jobs that I'll talk about later. Okay. But when you initiate the process, that doesn't mean that your SuccessFactors system is now already set up to use IAS for authentication. That's the first step in the process. Okay. Then as part of the second step, you can then decide whether you want to make some additional configuration changes where you might set up your identity authentication system to use your corporate IDP. You may add some additional policies, like including disk-based authentication, conditional authentication. These are all additional features, if you will, that are available in identity authentication service that you can then take advantage of, right? So if you want your SuccessFactors login to be redirected to your corporate IDP, you would, after the initiation step, you would need to make sure your IAS tenant is configured with that trust with your corporate IDP so you can forward the authentication request to your corporate IDP. Huh? Everyone with me so far?
Oh, there. I need a boat.
I'm not sure how many people are using SuccessFactors, but this is what you would follow, okay? As part of the next step, once you've got your SuccessFactors configured, then in step 3, you will run a provisioning job in IPS to read your SuccessFactors users from your SuccessFactors system and have them created in your IAS tenant that you're going to be using. And that is exactly what you did on the very first day in your exercises. We showed you how you can connect to SuccessFactors and read users from SuccessFactors and bring them into IAS. That is exactly what you will be doing in this process as well as one of the steps in step 3. Questions, Chris?
Yeah, so we do have SuccessFactors, and this is a future plan of ours. My question is, once they do the initial load or the initial read of all of the SuccessFactors users to IAS, then is there incremental or is it always full loads or
It's
full reads?
Yeah, so we do delta reads, right? So if there's a new user that would be added to SuccessFactor, the next time the job runs, it's not going to do a full load of the user. It will only do a delta load. But even that is, there is a certain, after a certain number of delta jobs, we also do a full user sync as well. I think you get, after like six jobs that are incremental, then there's a full user sync that happens in between as well as in one of the jobs.
Okay.
So there's a parameter you can add to IPS to control, like, how many delta jobs will run before it does a full user sync.
Okay.
Again, yeah.
I messed up.
Okay, so
thanks.
you're welcome. So once you followed
I just
the
messed up
process,
with
you
my
initiate the
building.
process, you configured your IIS tenant, maybe to redirect your corporate IDP. You've run the IPS job to bring your users in from SuccessFactors into IIS. At that point, you can go into your upgrade center again, and then you can say, okay, now I want to actually enable this integration. And once you enable that integration, at that point, your SuccessFactors system will use the authentication, use IAS for authentication, and you will no longer be using the native SuccessFactor login screen or native SuccessFactor login. All right, so let me kind of highlight that point just to want to make sure everyone understands, right? So where's my browser? Right, so here's my SuccessFactor. If I were to launch the SuccessFactor instance again, if I could find the link to it. Here, so let's launch it in an incognito window. Right. So right now, this login screen is coming from SuccessFactor. So this is what we call SuccessFactor native login. If this environment was set up properly to use IAS for authentication, then the login screen would come from either IAS, or if I've configured IAS to use my corporate IDP, then it would use the corporate IDP login screen. That's what I would see as an end user. Okay? You will not see the screen after you've completed the step that I was talking about right here, after you do step 4. Good?
Sorry, one other question, if nobody else has their hand raised. When users are terminated via SuccessFactors, because they're also in IAS, they do not get terminated there. That's still the Is that still the manual cleanup
No,
that we talked about before?
No, IPS will handle that. The manual cleanup that I was talking about was because of the corporate user store scenario. That's different than when you use IPS for provisioning. It will clean up users that don't exist in the source.
And for this process that's new with HR or SuccessFactors, you have to use IAS and IPS. Is that true?
Yes. You have to use IAS for authentication, and then IAS could be just a proxy to your corporate IDP, right? So if your current SuccessFactors system is using, say, Azure Active Directory for authentication, from a end user perspective, it will be pretty much transparent to them, because they will just still be redirected to Azure Active Directory for authentication. Only thing that would be different is people that use password login. For them, the URL would be different for password login because they have to use a slightly different workflow.
Okay, thanks.
Great. So that's at a high level, that's the process, right? So now when an end user needs to get access, so let's take a look at what the process will look like for them, right? So on the left-hand side, these are all the steps that you would complete to integrate IAS with SuccessFactor. Once that integration is done, then when an end user needs to access SuccessFactor, they would access the SuccessFactor URL, right? And they would be redirected to log into IAS. IAS can then either authenticate the user itself, or it can forward the authentication to your corporate IDP, or you can do multi-factor authentication and so on, right? It's really up to you if you even have this option enabled. Otherwise, IAS itself can be the tool that would authenticate the user. Okay. Once that authentication is done, either at the IAS level or at the corporate IDP level, that response would be sent to SuccessFactor, and at that point, the user will be able to log into the SuccessFactor environment. Okay. And like I was mentioning before, there'd be an ongoing IPS sync that would run. So there would be a job in your identity provisioning service that will read the users from SuccessFactors and write them into the IAS environment on an ongoing basis. If the user is, removed from the SuccessFactors system, they would also be removed from the IAS environment as well. Okay. Good. Okay, so you've seen this slide before. You know what identity provisioning. Chris, you have a question? I see some hands up. I'm not sure if there's any questions.
It wasn't me.
Yeah.
Do you have?
I have one question in the previous slide. Can we go back? So when you said when we remove the user from SuccessFactor, the user will be removed from the IAS as well. How his removal would be taken care in the corporate identity part? Like, how will the ID be removed from there as well?
Only if the IPS is also used to
Then play some
provision
other
to
game.
the IPS that can only delete users
Do some hobby.
from a system that it's provisioning to. Okay, so whatever is specified as a target is the only place that so if you're having if your Azure Active Directory is a target in IPS, then it would also remove the user from there as well. But IPS doesn't have by default a SCIM connector that allows you to write users to a non-SAP system. Okay? And Azure Active Directory would be a non-SAP system. If you want to use that connector, you have to purchase identity access governance. Okay? So normally IPS by itself would not allow you to write users to a non-SAP system. So you would have to follow a different process to get that user out of Azure Active Directory.
Okay.
So
That's it.
what if
Just 1 sec, I'm going to plug in my headset before my battery dies again.
Sit back.
Go ahead.
what if the
Sit back,
IES
no.
is the source? Will the ID be deleted from IBP? Oh, sorry, BTP.
If IAS is a source, no, it will not delete unless you're So like I said before, IPS, if you're using IPS to provision users to systems, whatever target system you're writing to, it will delete the user from that target system if it's also deleted from the source. So if IAS is your target and BTP is your target, it will delete it from both systems. Okay? But if you're only writing the user to IAS, just deleting it from IAS itself doesn't mean that it's also going to delete it from your BTP sub-account.
Thanks.
Okay?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
That's cool.
Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You know what IPS is, right? It has an option of source and target, right? So you read users from a source, you write to target. In our case, for this purpose, for SuccessFactors, the source is going to be your SuccessFactor environment, and your target would be your identity authentication service. Okay? And we provide the source and the target jobs when you initially integrate when you initiate the integration between SuccessFactors and IAS and IPS. We will not only set up the SuccessFactors system to trust IAS, but we also give you the source and the target jobs that you would need to run to be able to get the users provisioned. And then you can modify those jobs to handle
Okay,
certain
go play on.
situations where your users might not have, like, say, an email address in SuccessFactors.
Wait, I wanna
If that's
do
the
this.
case, you need
Clone
to
tycoon.
somehow handle that
Okay.
scenario,
It's not
because
not-
IAS expects the
fine.
user to have an
It's
email
when me and
address.
Paul play.
Right? So those are the types of
Turtles.
transformations
Connect.
then you would have to do to be able to deal with the provisioning job and make sure it
Where's
runs
my clone?
successfully.
Where's my clones? Oh, Sesame.
Uh,
Oh, it's 7.
right. So to initiate the process, as step one, like I said, to initiate the process, you would log into SuccessFactor, you would go into the Upgrade Center, and then you would say, okay, I want to actually integrate with IAS, right? At that point, you will be given a list of different IAS tenants that you have. You either pick an existing IAS tenant that you're using for production, test, QA type of use cases, depending upon what your SuccessFactor instance is, or you can request a new tenant. Or you can request a new tenant, right? So if you don't have an existing IAS tenant, you would go through the process of requesting a new tenant. Okay. And like I said on the very first day, for SuccessFactors, we would want you to standardize on a single production IAS tenant. And that production tenant should be not only used for SuccessFactors, but also should be used for other SAP applications,
Why?
whether it's S4HANA Cloud or SAC or whatever it might be. For test/QA environments, you can have that be two different instances. So if I have a test SuccessFactor environment and I have a QA SuccessFactor environment, you don't have to necessarily have both of those instances connected to the same IAS tenant. You can request a new tenant if you don't already have one, and have each SuccessFactor instance integrate with its own IAS tenant.
I'm not a live streamer.
Okay? The reason why we make that exception for SuccessFactors is so because it's just the integration is a little bit easier if you have your own IAS tenant for each SuccessFactor instance. A question on this?
Yeah, sorry, I just want to make sure I understood that properly. In production, SuccessFactors can share the same tenant with BTP or any other applications is in a production tenant. Is that right?
It should share the same production tenant
It
as every other.
should. That would. Okay. That would be like a best practice.
Exactly. From a licensing perspective, you're entitled to one production tenant and you're entitled to one test and QA tenant. So you're two tenants essentially in total. So your production scenarios should all be dealt with the production tenant. For your test QA, you should be sharing that tenant for test use cases, QA use cases, with the exception of SuccessFactors, where we do allow you to get more than one one IAS tenant for test and QA, just because it's easier to get the integration. But for every other application, you should be sharing that same tenant as well. You should not get a separate IAS tenant.
Okay, and then I've heard that when you're first bringing up your tenant for IAS, that SuccessFactors should be loading first, not like right now we have BTP up and it has its own tenant. Now we're getting ready to potentially do SuccessFactors. Is there an issue with SuccessFactors not being first? Does that make sense?
No, there is no issue. It doesn't really matter where your IAS tenant came from, right? If you got an IAS tenant, I think that's what your question was. So if your IAS tenant came with your BTP subscription, right? And that's your production IAS tenant.
Yeah.
Your SuccessFactor environment should be using that same IAS tenant.
Okay.
So we shouldn't even be giving you a new tenant if you already have a test and a production IAS instance.
Okay.
Right. So
Okay.
technically, yeah. So yeah. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. I think so. Thanks.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter where your IAS tenant comes from. You just have to make sure that you decide which one of those tenants becomes a production tenant, which one is your test tenant, and use them accordingly across your SAP landscapes. And if you go to that IAM tenant URL that we shared on the very first day, that gives you the listing of all your IAS IPS tenants. you will be able to see exactly which one is marked as test, which one is marked as production. So you pick the right one to use. Okay. All right. So that's step one after you initiate the process, right? You go to the upgrade center and request a new tenant if you need to, or integrate with an existing tenant, right? So this is just a screenshot of where you would do that. And I showed you that earlier in the system itself. Then once the step one is complete, then step two is to configure IAS, IPS, and enable IAS. So for step two, you would go into your IAS environment, into the admin console, and set up your corporate IDP, set up any risk-based authentication and whatnot, or add any additional groups if you want to. Those are some configuration things that you can do within the IAS environment. Okay. And this is just a screenshot of where you would do that. I'm not going to go through these screenshots, right? You've seen some of this stuff in your exercises already, right? So this screen is just talking about how you would set up the corporate IDP. Again, something you've done already, so that should not be news to you. We covered that over the past few days here. So step three would be to then set up IPS, right? So you would need to make sure you have your source system specified, your target system specified, and all of the transformations as well. So you can run the IPS job that will read the users from success factors and provision them into IAS. And you've seen that in your exercise on the very first day. So these are just some screenshots that I'm not going to go through. You should know how to do this already. And I'm not going to, right? And then, like I said, the last step would be to then go into the upgrade center again and enable IAS, right? And once that happens, your user will be, so you go into your upgrade center, you activate the identity authentication service, and at that point, your user will be authenticating through IAS. And this is just a screenshot of where you would go in the upgrade center to initiate this process. Okay. So at a very high level, there's obviously additional details that you need to read and understand this process better. So these resources that I have in the slide deck is very, very useful. This is a community, SuccessFactors community, that talks about this integration in a lot more detail. There's a lot of links to different blogs, different support notes that you need to be aware of when you're when you're running your provisioning job and so on, right? For example, if I have SuccessFactors system with users that don't have emails, I need to be able to handle that in my IPS so I can run my jobs properly. So it will give you tips and tricks on how to kind of deal with those types of scenarios. Okay. That's pretty much it for this part. Any questions?
Hi, Ajit. If the BTP and SuccessFactors are sharing the same IIS, if an employee is terminated, and the IAS, if it gets deleted, then with the trust configuration, it goes and deletes the user in BTP as well?
No, that was the same question that someone asked earlier. No, it will not just delete the user in BTP. Obviously, if they don't exist in IAS, they will never be able to log into BTP, right? You have to have, if your user, in order to get access to a BTP sub account or access the application in BTP sub account, I need to authenticate with IAS first, right? If that IAS user doesn't exist, even if the user sits in the BTP sub account, I can't log in, right? But the system itself will not delete the user in BTP. Okay.
So, what is the process to delete the user in BTP as well?
That's what I just talked about earlier as well, right? So if your IPS is responsible for provisioning the user into IAS and into your BTP, then it will delete it in both places. But if IPS is only provisioning to IAS, and then in your BTP configuration, you're using the shadow user creation and whatnot, and in that scenario, it's not going to delete the user.
Gagi, shall we start about the...
What? What? The what?
Java?
Minecraft?
No, sorry, dungeon.
Now? Not yet.
Let me figure out what all recordings I have moved into our. Record also this one.
Okay. Papa, can you make it more this side? Otherwise, it's hard for me to see. Wait, let me pull in some
I got the
things.
TMT. Together. We need to attack together. Hey, there is no way here.
Golem's still here.
Yeah. You put your bees?
And I put my iron golem.
Yes. Down now.
Where do we go? Enemies.
Yay!
I told you.
Good job. That's a very good job. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Can you do one thing, Kiki? Shall we now focus on? I think this last time's dungeon we had recorded and we had done it properly. Let me check. Videos, Minecraft. Yeah, I think we did that. Now I think we should do. I'm stopping the streaming, okay?
Okay.